Hello, thank you for the invitation to take part in this conference. The title of my presentation is Art and Literature as Alternate Forms of Expression in Pablo Picasso. Pablo Picasso emerged as a full-fledged writer starting in the mid-1930s, using Spanish and French in diverse formats to compose poems. Picasso did not see any problem for an artist to also express himself in writing. He stated, "When it comes down to it, all arts are one. You can write a painting with words just as you can paint feelings in a poem." The interconnection between art and literature should not be surprising. After all, they're both common forms of expression since ancient times. Picasso's ability to express himself simultaneously in both provides us with a window on how the two areas are interrelated. Many of Picasso's early literary compositions had a palpable dark tone. In the poem Pilgrim Beauty, he wrote of dying shadows, the silence of death, and the correspondence of the above and the below. In The Violets and Dead Drunk Silence, he dwelled deeper into this domain he saw as inhabited and controlled by destructive, numinous powers. He believed in suprapersonal forces that one should fear, threatening spirits that rule the world in an unrecognizable way and plunge it into disaster. Poetry as art provided him with the means to fight these hostile powers. They were his weapons to counter these unknown threatening spirits, he explained to Marot, just like ancient African masks, he said. The gloomy mood in his writing is clearly connected to the troubling news coming from Spain, where the political situation had been deteriorating for years. In 1930, disappointed by King Alfonso XIII's acceptance of a coup d'etat by General Miguel Primo de Rivera, Niceto Alcalá Zamora had declared he would no longer collaborate with the regime. The following year, the urban population would also side against the monarchy and vote for Republican parties in the municipal election. The Second Spanish Republic was proclaimed on April 14, 1931. Marked by a period of economic depression, it quickly led to a high unemployment and scarcity of resources, eliciting general dissatisfaction with the new government, as well as the traditional centers of power, such as the church, landowners, and the nobility. In the ensuing civil unrest, violence in the form of assassinations, general strikes, and mob action increased dangerously. Political discourse became increasingly polarized with the rise of totalitarian ideas, especially fascism in Germany and Italy, and Stalinism in the Soviet Union. In November 1933, Niceto Alcalá Zamora had dissolved the Cortes and called for elections. The party that ended up with the highest number of votes was the right-wing Confederación Española de Derechas Autónomas, CEDA, but it was not sufficient to govern on its own. Still, the entry of 3 conservative ministers into the government led to a general strike, an armed uprising by socialists and anarchists in Asturias in 1934. Miners occupied the capital Oviedo, killing police officers and clergymen, burning theaters and university buildings. The army, led by General Francisco Franco, crushed the rebellion, destroying large areas of the city in the process. There was a simultaneous autonomist rebellion in Catalonia, which was also repressed through massive political arrests. These events caused a radical turn within the left parties, especially the PSOE, where the moderate Indalecio Prieto was losing support to Francisco Largo Caballero, who advocated for a socialist revolution, regardless of cost and consequences, much like in the Soviet Union. On January 7, 1936, Niceto Alcalá Zamora called for new elections. The result was a narrow victory for socialists, communists, and Catalan Republicans, who, in spite of their major rivalries and differences, decided to work together under the name Frente Popular. But despite their attempt at unified action, the coalition would be undermined both by revolutionary groups such as the anarchist CNT and by anti-democratic far-right groups like the Falange and the Carlistas. Soon, gunfights broke out in the streets on the left. Landless laborers began to seize property, religious officials were murdered, and churches burned. On the right, on the other hand, the militias and gunmen hired by employers systematically eliminated liberal art activists. As a result, the country slowly slipped into civil war. Picasso reacted to the growing political tension by waging war against what he perceived to be all-encompassing. He wrote, "String the thread through the needle with your bamboo sword and prick it from the right side through the fat nape of a glance concealed behind a glass of limpid water. His cosmophobic vision of the world was in agreement with similar positions concurrently endorsed by friends and associates like Max Jacob, Blaise Cendrars, André Breton, and Jean-Paul Sartre. In the poem Military Alarm, Picasso described his feeling of being at an impasse, the heart stuck in the mud in the middle of the road, no exit, octopus fastened to the core of the warm ball, source of the river of feathers, earth welded, head lowered. On April 24th, he expressed Legs in the Air, in Legs in the Air his reaction to feeling stuck as a dying minotaur, round of nails hammered into the fire at the president's throat, the mud stuck, wheel in the pond biting with rage, the eye of the expiring bull. The malicious center of night is where the rainbow of hope turns upside down, a central marsh bristling with eyes, nails, teeth, and spitting fire. The same feeling of confusion and desperation is observed in his portrait of Dora Maar, his companion through these years. In the oil straw hat with blue foliage of May 1st, Picasso treated body and face as elements that could be disassembled and reassembled at will, according to his own pictorial logic, pushing the disarticulation of the human likeness to the extreme. The head appears to be toppling, his nostrils and mouth frozen in warped curves of anxiety. A nightmare of paralysis and disintegration. She becomes almost literally a fallen idol. On May 6th, he made the important gouache Minotaur and Dead Mare in front of a cave facing a veiled girl, in which the white mare appears dead, a symbol of sacrifice. Picasso used the narrative of Ariadne's tragic abandonment by Theseus on the island of Naxos. In the middle ground, we see a woman clad in a white garb, covered by a transparent veil, with a powerful severed hand of fate posted in front of it, as if gripping the forsaken lover. The Minotaur stretches his enlarged left arm in an attempt to cover the side of his victim. In Wounded Minotaur, Ryder, and other characters, the monster receives punishment for his cruelty. A female figure mounted on a rearing horse and wielding a lance is trying to thrust it into the back of the Minotaur, who struggles to rise from the ground and beg compassion from the female figures watching him from a boat, a scene halfway between the sacrificial arena of the bull ring and the waters of the sea that symbolize death. The poem Rolled Up Body includes multiple references to these characters. The bronze dress with pearls of laughter appears in the middle of the square, the pink dirtied with sperm. Crowned with flowers, the young girl, clad in white feathers, standing on her boat, made of marble slabs, drifting in the liquid air. The theme again is sacrifice. The scene illustrated in composition with Minotaur provides a dramatic narrative that can be similarly applied to the country's current state of affairs. On the left appears the image of a woman shrouded by the sail, while the impaled Minotaur, understood to be Picasso's alter ego, has fallen on his own sword and lies in agony at her feet. The raft on which the Minotaur lies dying alludes to the raft of Odysseus, while the laurel-crowned woman is a reference to the virtuous Calypso, the nymph whom Odysseus had abandoned to return to his wife. On May 10th, he continued with the same myth in the gouache Wounded Minotaur, Horse, and Other Characters, which represents the Minotaur lying defeated on the ground, his body mercilessly pierced from side to side by the lance. Looking on from the sidelines are the faint outlines of Calypso and Theseus. The executioner is no longer a woman, but a mare with blazing wings, which stamps upon the dying Minotaur with her hoof. On May 11th, he returned to the theme of sacrifice in the poem If the Dress, shifting it from the Minotaur to his companion. If the dress loosened at the shoulders falls like a stone to the bottom of the pool, and shatters the drawing's pane, the watcher's spring catches her eye and blinds her and abandons her in the hands of the hangman. Dead leave, lighten up the advance of the Medusa's skull between the pages of the book, liquid overflowing from the bowl at the sound of the dead drunk numbers, falling drop by drop on the flagstones of the fire. The previous day, Premier Manuel Azaña had been elected president of Spain after President Niceto Alcalá Zamora had been deposed by the Cortes, removing the leader more capable of bringing together all the different factions in the Spanish Republican left. As a result, violence between extremists spread like wildfire in the following months. On July 13, José Calvo Sotelo, then leader of the right-wing opposition, was assassinated. Calvo Sotelo was the most prominent Spanish monarchist and had protested against what he viewed as an escalating anti-religious terror, expropriations, and hasty agricultural reforms, which he considered Bolshevist and anarchist. Sotelo's murder aroused the right's suspicions of government involvement in the act. It was the catalyst for further political polarization. On July 17th, spurred to action by the assassination of Calvo Sotelo, a group of right-wing military officers made its planned move. An army mutiny began in Spanish Morocco. The military uprising, pronunciamiento, was led by generals Emilio Mola, Francisco Franco, and José Sanjurjo. The move was intended to immediately seize power, but successful resistance by Republicans in Madrid, Barcelona, Valencia, and the Basque region pushed the country into the prolonged Spanish Civil War. Picasso's gloomy frame of mind might have been aggravated by the newspaper headlines on August 8th. Despite initial support for the Republicans' cause in Spain, the French Prime Minister Léon Blum had signed a non-intervention pact. The poem, Now Nothing More, reflected his feelings. Everything is harsh and cruel, nothing else now, but for the aloe and gall, and the thistle and the lime, the nettle and the mallow, on top of the quince that smells like a burned wooden shoe, and the amorous song of the raven, frightened by his shadow, shattered into 1,000 pieces, the drunken bell that falls into the well. That same cruelty is imprinted on the oil, starry reclining nude. Partially covered by dirty white sheets and a green blanket, a female nude spreads out flat, or rather is pressed flat, on a bed-like structure on top of a patterned violet carpet. The range of colors for the entire composition is one that had come to symbolize Dora and the war, purplish pink and green. This anthropomorphized landscape depicts the hopeless state of the world. The abused female body is neither really a nude nor a landscape, but an explicit metaphor for his current reality. The Republicans' position was worsening. The Nationalists had captured Irún on September 5th and now controlled the border between the Basque provinces and France. When the Nationalists began bombing Madrid, his frustration exploded in the poem If the Tender Memory. If the memory of the broken glass in his eye does not strike the hour, on the bell that perfumes the blue, he tired of loving the garment, sighing that covers him, the sun that made from one moment to the next exploding his hand, re-enter his claws and fall asleep in the shade. On October 3rd, Picasso expressed his frustration about the situation in Spain in miserable chagrin. Miserable chagrin enclosed in the body, so cramped in the crown of his nest of thorns. Miserable memory of Jasmine's scent pinned to the bottom of his eye, caught in a trap, distance color deleted from the rolls of the living, when life boils in the great village hall. Many items in the poem Rotting Flesh, immediately following, refer to Christian sacrifice, such as the crown of thorns, nest of twigs, at the sound of the tambourine, awakened by their miserable memory. His suffering was equally reflected in the woman's split head in Portrait of Dora Maar from November 11th. The truncated forehead marks a dividing line between the two halves of the face, the left side being all but submerged in the shadows. Since their first meeting, Picasso had been captivated by her perceptiveness, and she came to be the mirror of the emotional and intellectual anxieties awakened in him by the war. The same despondency is evident in the poet's attic, where it is his companion Dora Maar that appears spread out on the table. On December 27th, he made another portrait of her in Head of Dora Maar. Curiously, in these and related works, the artist chose to depict her wearing a mask over her face. He had always been fascinated by African masks. He explained to Marot they were magic things, they were weapons to help people avoid coming under the influence of spirits. They were intercessors. Throughout the years they were together, Dora would take the same role of intercessor that those masks had played for centuries. On January 17th, 1937, nationalist troops assisted by Italian and Moorish soldiers began their assault on the Republican held city of Malaga. As the siege was going on, Picasso painted the oil portrait of the Marquis of Christian Ass, an irrevocable indictment of the supporters of Franco's army, monarchists, Carlists, the wealthy conservative classes, as well as the clergy. His art clearly incorporates elements of resistance against those forces of oppression. Depressed and disappointed, Picasso wrote the poem Sound of Footsteps. Suspended between heaven and earth on the balcony, hooked to clouds of dust, reflected to the four corners of the map, wandering with all the hands under the petals of a carnation. Disorientation and the fragmentation of all pre-established frameworks tends to produce melancholia, a loss of control over reality, symbolized by this dissolution of the self. No object, no subject, only the abject remains. The world, as the artist knew it, was collapsing around him. He projected all these feelings of anger and perplexity on Dora in Dull and Drowning Woman. The scene depicted is unreal. She appears immobilized like a mannequin, on an upright tripod prong aimed menacingly at her sex. Rays emanate from the dark sun, spreading over the landscape like a rain of fire. In the water, one can see the head of a pleading arms of a drowning figure calling for help in vain. Standing at the edge of the water and sentenced to immobility, her feet do not reach the ground, the woman is unable to help. This may symbolize the painter's frustration at hearing about the massacre in his hometown, unable to do anything about it. This month in particular was a turning point for Picasso in his decision to submit a work for the Spanish Pavilion. Delegation from the Spanish Republican government had come down to his studio. Among them were Josep Luis Ser and José Gauss, both involved with the Spanish Pavilion at the upcoming Exposición Internacional. They had a particular request, the execution of a mural for the pavilion. By February, Dora Maar had found Picasso the spacious studio he needed to fit the large frame for the commissioned mural. It was located in the center of Paris on the second floor of a 17th century hotel. The studio's history also provided Picasso with ties to a literary and artistic past. It was presumably the setting of Balzac's the masterpiece Unknown, which he had illustrated. The new studio became an extension of his own self in the poem Escarole y Forgotten. He wrote of the thousands of reflections, silence, hidden in the shadows, the monotony of his colors forgotten by the enemy for its happiness, moved to tears by rubbing the eyes with onions. In a world where the human body ensures a certain unity and control, his universe is reduced to the status of something edible, escarole. Reality is grasped and mastered through the mouth, a versatile organ in Picasso. In another poem, When the Light, the body absorbs the dimensions of an inhabited space, a body house, which can be nevertheless penetrated by the encompassing universe. The light arrives counting its steps, so tired and charged by so many wrinkles to introduce his nose into the lock of the large chest. The whip lashes given to his shoulders in the reflection of the lentil dish, besides the shadow of the potatoes, doesn't take a grain of love from the solicitude of desire. It was precisely his own studio that would feature in the first sketches for the mural. Even in the final painting, the confusion remains whether we're dealing with an outside space or inside space, the inside space or the outside world. The battle that is taking place in Spain is reflected in both spheres.